Greetings, this is Mike Billington. I'm the co-editor of the Executive Intelligence Review, and I'm here today with Diane Sare, who is a candidate for the U.S. Senate versus Senator Chuck Schumer in the state of New York. Diane is also the founder of the Schiller Institute New York City Chorus and a longtime associate of Lyndon LaRouche. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Your opponent, Chuck Schumer, has been called the senator from Wall Street, and he's been called a lot of other things. Running against him clearly has both local and national, and in fact, international implications. How do you see the role of your campaign in the extreme strategic and economic crisis of the world today?
Well, I think we definitely need a voice nationally for the policies of Lyndon LaRouche, particularly since everything that he warned about throughout his many years of economic forecasting, political forecasting, is now occurring. Most recently, one of our associates, Paul Gallagher, brought up Mr. LaRouche's comments after the murder of Gaddafi in Libya, saying that the intent of this was to go for war with Russia, not because of anything Russia had done, but to create a major conflagration so that the British, the great financial interests which Schumer represents, could in effect blow out the system under the cover of war and then write off all of their debt. So LaRouche was warning of this already in 2011. Schumer, as the majority leader of the US Senate, is the hatchet man, the front man for these policies. And whatever I have called him, he actually bragged at an event I attended, a cocktail reception at City and State magazine, that a hip hop band in Staten Island had given him the nickname Killer Chuck, which he bragged about, but I think is a very appropriate moniker for his activity.
You're running as a LaRouche Independent candidate in New York. What does that mean exactly, and why are you not running with one of the major parties?
Great, I'm glad you asked. This is really very important. One, as LaRouche said on his 90th birthday, the party system is dead. It's finished. You see in the mobilization and buildup for World War III, the unity of both major parties. And for example, on sanctions on Russia, of which Schumer has been one of the leading proponents, as he is on sanctions against China, 98 out of 100 senators always seem to vote the same way. So that is a broken system. There is no such thing as a two-party system. Roger Stone has called it the duopoly. And I think the American people frankly have had it. I think they're smart enough to realize that's over. In the state of New York, one of the peculiar things of the very corrupt election system here is that there is no such thing as running as an independent candidate. You actually have to create a body, at what they call an independent body, and have your own party line on the ballot. And you're allowed to have 15 letters. I'll have to have an abbreviation for independent, but my independent body is going to be called LaRouche Independent. And then you have an emblem for your party or your body. My body's emblem will be a treble clef, because I want the musical aspect of the campaign to be there on the ballot for everybody. So that's the situation. And the state has made it extremely difficult for a non-major party affiliated candidate to get on the ballot. They just recently, in the 2020-2021 budget, arbitrarily increased the number of signatures that an independent statewide candidate needs to get from 15,000 to 45,000 in the same 6-week period of time.
That's rather ironic, given all the talk about voting rights these days, that they're making it virtually impossible for independents to even get on the ballot to be available. Do you have more to say on that?
Yeah, they also got rid of two very significant, you can call them minor parties, but the Green Party and the Libertarian Party have had many candidates. The Libertarian Party just celebrated its 50-year anniversary. They have organization in every county in the state, but the previous law said you needed 50,000 votes every 4 years, for example, the presidential election years, to keep your ballot line. They changed that to 2% of the vote, or 130,000 votes. The Libertarian candidate, I think, had 104,000 votes last time he ran for governor. Greens were something similar, 98,000, something like that. I may be a little off on the figures. They weren't that far off. They both were thrown off the ballot with this. They are therefore required also to get 45,000 valid signatures to get on the ballot. And there's another party, Serve America, which was thrown off.
The Schiller Institute, which was founded by Lyndon LaRouche's wife, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, has issued a petition in 10 different languages calling for the convocation of an international conference to establish a new security and development architecture for all nations. How is your campaign acting on that concept and that petition?
Well, interestingly, this war drive and the insanity of it all, and the fact that we installed a pro-Nazi regime in Ukraine in 2013, 2014 under the Obama-Biden administration, has caused many people to start listening to us. And all of the spokesmen for LaRouche, Helga Zepp-LaRouche emphatically, myself, Harley Schlanger, Jacques Cheminade in Europe, are reporting that we're each getting massively increasing numbers of viewers of our posts in YouTube, Facebook, social media, etc. In my case, on my Friday symposium, I've had a 10-fold increase in the number of people watching, and some of my videos have gone to 70,000 views, and therefore people are developing and are hungry clearly for a more profound conception, which Helga brings into this. The idea of the Treaty of Westphalia, first of all, is a beautiful, timely idea, because people who would argue, oh, we're too far gone, you'll never stop war, they've always been killing each other, etc. Well, have we been killing each other longer than the 150 years of religious fighting in Europe that led to that? And what would cause people to adopt such an agreement as the Treaty of Westphalia could only be that they consider the future. That they, rather than saying, well, I have to get revenge for this, that, and the other thing which was done to me or my nation, they say, where is this behavior leading us? And when you put it in that perspective, as we can see right now, that the behavior of the British, the Biden administration, NATO, is surely leading us into World War III, perhaps people can say, well, we would like a different goal. We need to change the trajectory of this. And therefore, people may be able to put aside their pragmatic, vengeance-driven motivations to consider this. I found, and then emphatically in this is the LaRouche's 4 laws, because you cannot have, there is no such thing as a static no war situation. You only have motion either forwards or backwards. So you have to have economic development. You have to have an economic platform that goes with that, starting with the bankruptcy of a rotten system, which the Glass-Steagall re-imposition of the Glass-Steagall Act would allow to occur. What I've seen happening with my posts is I've been promoting this petition, and many people are writing in the comments, I signed. So we're gathering signatures that way. And also we'll be releasing this week a listing of several dozen VIP signers representing institutions around the world. I think this is an urgently needed initiative, because you have to have a sense of where you want to end up. You never should enter a war if you don't have a conception of victory. We didn't choose the war that we're in. But if we want to have an idea how to solve it, we must have in mind an arrival point which we have to get to. And I think this petition is really brilliant in that regard because it gives people a sense of how to get out of this.
The state you're running in includes one of the great cities of the world, New York City. I would suspect that people who have lived in New York or know New York are very much aware that there's been a degeneration of that city, which would cause people to perhaps agree more with you that we need an international agreement to stop not only the strategic crisis, but also the economic crisis. New York was not only one of the great cities, but it was a symbol of the melting pot idea of the United States. What is your approach to the question of New York City, and what is its condition today?
Well, there was a reason why Lyndon LaRouche in 2014 called for the creation of the Manhattan Project. And I think the idea was not only that New York City was a melting pot, but it also was the point for unifying the nation. The first, George Washington was sworn in there. Alexander Hamilton was based there. He was based there when he made the proposal at the end of the American Revolution that the debt of the war should be taken on by the government as a whole and not by every state separately. And he had a huge brawl with Thomas Jefferson on that point. But that was critical because while we did celebrate Evacuation Day and many of the British left, all of them didn't, and there were certain sympathizers, and had the debt not been taken on by the federal government as a whole, it would have been easy to pull the states apart and destroy our new republic. And so New York was really a center of that, and also the fight against slavery. Gouverneur Morris, John Jay, Hamilton, very active proponents of ending slavery as an economic practice. New York developed to be really the most important city in the world. The United Nations is located there. The New York Stock Exchange, which used to have a relationship to productive enterprise, not anymore. So I think it's also been a target for people who want to destroy the republic. And I have to say, what we've seen since the pandemic in particular, and there was a great ratcheting down in the 70s with the Municipal Assistance Corporation and deinstitutionalization of mentally ill people, shutting down the mental hospitals, shutting down the hospitals. That's been going on for some time. But in the last couple of years, the city has become it looks like something out of a movie. I have to say it's really horrible. There were a team of LaRouche organizers set up on the Upper West Side with their table, and during their organizing, 2 large rats at different points came scurrying across the sidewalk right in the middle of their organizing. The city is getting overrun with rats. In Brooklyn, people's cars are getting destroyed by rats because they're coming in and chewing up all the wiring, if you can imagine. You have an epidemic of mental illness. They tossed many people out of the homeless shelters to alleviate crowding during the pandemic, and then put them into the hotels with none of the programs that they would normally have. And they paid the hotels the full rate. This is such a Wall Street ripoff. They didn't pay a discounted rate because of an emergency. They paid the full rate of those rooms, $250 a night or whatever, to house homeless people at great expense to make sure that the quote-unquote hotel industry was funded. So everything is a scam. Nothing is done in the interest of the general welfare of the population, but is done to bail out a system and to promote this Great Reset Green New Deal. The other thing, as you may know, is they're shutting down. They started with Bloomberg putting in all these bike lanes, shutting down major streets to traffic altogether. As of 2 years ago, the average speed that you could drive in Manhattan was 4.9 miles per hour. Um, and now you have people getting pushed in front of subway cars. We've had hundreds of incidents like that by people who are mentally ill, who may have drug addiction problems, who are homeless, who are living in the subways. Um, it's really, and people are now coming back into the city, so you have a slightly higher ratio of stable people to insane people. But there was a period of time at the height of the pandemic where I really felt like I'd walked into a bad movie. I mean, I went into a convenience store, and there was someone who, there were three people inside, I think, who were addicted to drugs. And one of them had turned on the smooth, those icy things where the stuff is coming out of the nozzle with no cup under it, didn't notice it. The owner was trying to get them to turn it off, but he was clearly terrified for his life. Just surreal scenes. People in affluent neighborhoods waking up to discover that someone had defecated on their doorstep every morning. That's the kind of thing that you have going on in New York City. It's actually quite shocking. And I know people who come in from out of the United States are actually appalled and horrified by how filthy and run down the city is. We have a new mayor now. I think Mayor Adams would like to do something about it, but can he break out of the Wall Street run axioms, and can he break away from Wall Street to be able to act to defend the general welfare? That's another question.
What is needed to restore New York to its previous position in the world?
That's a good question. First of all, LaRouche's 4 laws urgently. I think you need a CCC type program. I think it might even be the case that you would have to be like the Chinese and build a new city somewhere 30 or 40 miles away and take half the population out so you can build infrastructure from the ground up. One of the things we discovered in the flooding was, as we knew, but the extent I was not aware of, the whole sewer system is about a century old. So in Woodside, Queens, where about a dozen people drowned in their basements during Tropical Storm Ida, it turns out that in the 70s, it had been recommended that for 50,000, they did not have the adequate sewer lines for 50,000 people that lived there. The population there is now triple that. They never built the improvements that were recommended in the 70s. So it's a massive need. We need more care for people who are mentally ill. We need to stop shutting down hospitals, but you can't do this outside of the context of a reorganization of the whole system. And I think people should ask themselves why they think it's legitimate that AIG can get $80 billion in a bailout at a pop. No one ever says, where are you going to get the money? They just come up with it. But when you say we have to rebuild the infrastructure of the city from underground up as part of a modernization of the entire United States, people say, well, how are you going to pay for it? They should consider, they don't give a second thought about bailing out some bankrupt Wall Street speculative garbage. But when it comes to investing in things that actually are going to generate growth and a return, they have questions. And I would like to say you can't do it in isolation. The thing I've seen in New York of people talking about the infrastructure, you can't just rebuild New York City. It's ports, it's a hub of transportation. You're going to have to take the railroad lines of New Jersey, New York into Pennsylvania up to Massachusetts. You're going to have to think of the thing as a region and have several cities simultaneously: New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Boston. All of them are going to have to undergo a transformation simultaneously.
You've also campaigned across the state. You've held meetings and events in many parts of the state, and you hold a virtual event every Friday night during the pandemic for people from around the state and from people from other states. And you've drawn in many people from different layers of society and different professions to address various aspects of the crisis in society. And you also use social media a great deal to get out your message and to organize people to this effort. How would you describe the response? You mentioned that you've had a vast increase in people watching and so forth. How do you find the response to your campaign generally now?
I think people are relieved. It's not really a matter of agreement. They want to actually be able to discuss through major problems. The topics on the Friday symposium have been the prison situation, the psychological trauma of prisoners, and there's a lot more to be discussed on that, the housing situation, the floods. We've also had people discussing nuclear power. We just have shut down Indian Point, and I understand in these recent weeks now they're beginning the full dismantling, so it cannot be reopened, which is completely insane given that we're going to have blackouts and brownouts. Governor Hochul, not only are they shutting down Indian Point, but they're shutting down, she has yanked the permits for gas-powered plants that were supposed to replace Indian Point, so we can look forward to not having enough energy. So people, top engineers, scientists, people who were victims of the floods, the fire in the Bronx, people who have been working on low-dose radiation, farmers. We've had all kinds of guests on the historians on the Friday symposium, and I have been told by many people that they find it absolutely delightful, that they follow them every week to see what's next. And yeah, so people, and what happens is the people involved in the prison advocacy end up getting really interested in what's happening with Indian Point. The people from Indian Point get interested in knowing what happened in the Battle of Cherry Valley with the massacre by the British and their Native American mercenaries. You know, people who are involved in keeping Evacuation Day alive find out that they're interested in what happened with the floods in Queens. So it's what I'm finding with the symposium is contrary to the media narrative. The American people are not really divided. The algorithms of social media are designed to make us divided by getting an imaginary or a real profile and just feeding you into a certain track. But you know, do people need food? Do they need electricity? Do they really want their child to be contemplating what gender they are at the age of 5? These are things that people are pretty unified on. People don't want war, largely. The reason why Trump got elected, I believe, had a great deal to do with his pledge to end the never-ending, end the forever wars. So there are many areas of major importance around which Americans are united, and the worse the crisis gets, the more united Americans can become if you have leadership that is putting a solution on the table.
So lastly, let me note that you are an accomplished trombone player, trombonist, I guess you'd say. And as we mentioned, you're the founder of the Schiller Institute New York City Community Chorus and co-conductor. So do you think being a musician has a bearing on your activity as a candidate? And is there a relationship between politics and music, or should there be?
Yes, definitely. And I mean, there's just an incredible paper by Lyndon LaRouche called Politics as Art, which I would really recommend people read. But, you know, I think musicians are playing an important role in the world today. You have the orchestra in, I'm not sure where it's based, Jerusalem or somewhere, of Palestinian and Israeli young people, musicians, performing together. You've just had concerts in Europe, Western Europe, of Ukrainian and Russian music together. The point about music in particular, because it's not visual, because it's fully in the mind, allows you to place yourself where human identity really should be. because as LaRouche reminded us so many times, each of us is ultimately going to die. There is no person who has been here on this planet for 200 years or something like that. So the question is, what is your identity? What is it that makes mankind immortal? What are those things that actually remain after our life has disappeared? And when you think from that standpoint, you realize that many of the things that we're all squabbling over are frankly not that important. The question is mankind as a whole. I think you have a similar effect, but all of us can't participate in this as easily when many of these astronauts who've been in space and looked back on the Earth for the first time have a kind of overwhelming sense of the smallness of our planet in the scope of the galaxy and how really insignificant all the borders and divisions are among mankind. And that is not to say, just to be very clear for our listeners, that I'm advocating a one world government or something like that. But as in a chorus, as in a symphony orchestra, there is a richness in the diversity. So the fact that nations have a national culture, a national language, a history of contributions that they've made, if you're taking this from the appropriate standpoint of a classical composition, then what you discover is that the whole of mankind is capable of things greater than the sum of its parts. And I think this is very, very important and should not be lost. And that's not to diminish in any way the contributions of the individual person or the individual nation, but actually is an augmentation of those creative breakthroughs.
Well, I think your campaign is a demonstration of that idea of acting on behalf of mankind. As Schiller said, one must be both a patriot of one's nation, but a citizen of the world, as I think you're demonstrating. Is there any final thought that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think you know certainly whereof you speak, given your experience with music in the prison. It's very important. My final thought is that people should consider very seriously the moment we're in history. I think we are not going to, we may get another chance, but I wouldn't count on it. I think our chance is now in this moment. So if you're alive right now, and you probably are if you're reading or looking at this interview, then the time to act is now. It's not going to exist for some future generation, and your life and what you do with it can be exceedingly important.
Okay, thank you very much, Diane Sare. People can go to sareforsenate.com, correct, as your website? Yes. And I encourage you to do so and to tune in, especially on the Friday night events, which are at what time? 7:30?
7:30. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, Diane, and we'll sign off.
Great, thank you.